Today on CJ Off-Road, we're going to show you how to increase the horsepower of your Jeep Wrangler. If you're looking to add some more power to your JK with minimal effort, then today we're going to look at this K&N 77 series air intake fitting your 2012 to 2018 Jeep Wrangler. This K&N 77 series air intake features a free-flowing mandrel bent aluminum tube with K&N's signature air filter. It's going to replace the restrictive factory air filter and intake housing and increase your horsepower and torque with this new air intake. It's going to allow your Jeep to inhale a larger amount of air compared to the stock intake, and it'll give you more usable power when you're out on the trail or on the highway. It includes a black rubber-topped high-flow air filter and a heat shield to protect it from the engine heat. Now today we're going to get it installed on our 2016 Jeep Wrangler. Tools needed for this installation: a 3/8 inch ratchet, 5/16 inch socket, 10mm socket, a 5/32 Allen key, a 3/8 extension, 10mm box wrench, 9/16 inch box wrench, flathead screwdriver, pair of pliers, scissors, and a tape measure. We're going to get started with our K&N 77 series air intake with a bit of teardown with the factory components. We're going to pull the engine cover off, the intake tube, and then the air box here, so let's get started now. To pull the engine cover off, simply pull it up. It'll pull off those little tabs there. Get it up about halfway and then just pull it right towards you. Set this aside, you'll put it back on later. To get this intake tube off here, we're going to start from the throttle body sensor. This will use a flathead screwdriver to pull this clamp off. Then we'll work on these next two bolts, which are 10mm, and then another flathead screwdriver to get it off the air box. Get that nice and loosened up, that way it slips off your throttle body here. The next step is going to be to remove the clasps on the top of the airbox. That way we can get this tube and the assembly up out of the Jeep. To get the airbox lid off, there's 4 clasps that needs to be removed. There's one right up here at the front, and to get them off, just simply pull them right towards you. There's one right back here underneath the intake tube, one up here next to your fuses, and then there's one right back here. And then you can pull the lid off as well as the rest of the intake tube. Before you can remove the tube, make sure you disconnect this connection here, and then you can pull your intake tube out. To get your airbox lid off, simply remove this hose from the crankcase. To get the lower part of the airbox out, there are 2 studs at the bottom. If you pull up on the airbox, it should pull right up for you. With all the factory components out, there's only 2 bolts left for us to remove. There's one right here on this fuse tray kind of molded piece, and then there's one up here next to the steering fluid and right next to the radiator cap. We'll get them removed. It's a 10mm socket just like the rest. Make sure you hold on to these bolts as you'll be reusing them with the new K&N filter. The second bolt to remove is up here, like I said, between the radiator cap and the power steering fluid cap. It's kind of hard to see, but it's right underneath here, tucked away. It's a 10mm socket once again. To get this intake installed, there's a little bit of prep work that needs to be done. We're going to use these Z-brackets as well as these little push pins here, and then some hardware to get them properly mounted up. Now on these Z-brackets, there's a longer side here and then a shorter one. Make sure that the push pin is on here on the longer side and facing down as such. Grab a washer, put it on top of your bolt, and then a lock washer, and then it'll thread right into the bottom here. We're going to get it snugged up, but as you can see, the hole is oblong, so you have a little bit of adjustability depending on where the mounting shield wants to go. Repeat the same process for this other Z-bracket here. To tighten these down, use a 10mm socket and an adjustable crescent wrench on the lip on this side. Go ahead and grab this part of the shield here. As you can see, it has the opening for the intake as well as these 3 points on the top. Once you have it at that orientation, flip it over and you'll be able to see the bottom. With those two brackets that we just made up, you're going to head to put it in this orientation and put them on both sides using provided hardware. Make sure the bolt goes through downwards like this. Go ahead and grab a washer and then a nylock locking nut. Just make sure it's on, and then we'll move on to the other side and get that one installed. These are going to use a 10mm hardware, so you're going to use a 10mm socket and then an open box wrench. Get these tightened up before you put it on the Jeep, as when these studs go in, you won't be able to really get to it. Get them snugged up, then when you get on the Jeep, you can figure out if these need to move at all. These are going to go in that same spot where the lower portion of the airbox came out of. Just pop right into those holes. Working on the same piece, we're going to go ahead and grab this filter adapter. It has threaded on ends on the back, and you're going to put it in on this orientation with the wider side being towards the interior, towards those bolts that you just tightened down. We're going to grab one of the Allen key head bolts, put a washer on each one, and then get them installed. Go ahead and grab an Allen key socket and get these tightened up. K&N includes this full-length piece of trim here, and it's going to go on that shroud that we were just working on. You need to cut it in a 22-inch section, a 7-inch section, and a 6-inch section, so let's get it measured up now. Make sure the trim piece is straight, and then just grab a little marker. We're going to do the first one at 22. We'll get that cut and then measure it from there. We're going to make this mark at 6 inches here, and luckily this piece is 13, so that other 7 will give us the perfect length. Go ahead and grab the shroud, and you're going to put the 6-inch on this side and then the 7-inch on the other side here. This should go in there pretty nice and tight, as there's a little piece of metal in between this rubber here. Give it a tight fit. We're going to put the 22-inch piece here on top of the shroud that has the K&N logo on it. Start at this top corner and make sure you go below the bolt hole there. That way you can still get your bolt and nut through. If the gasket does cover up the hole as it did with ours, just trim a little bit more off of it. That's all it took to give it a nice fit. With most of the prep work being done on the table, we're now ready to start installing the K&N filter into the Jeep. Go ahead and grab this piece with the filter shroud onto it, and we're going to put these little push pins into the factory airbox location right here at the bottom. Give them a good push, but since they are going into a rubber grommet, it's still going to have a little bit of play. This will get fixed up when we put the top of the cover on. With that part of the heat shield installed, we're going to go ahead and put our new K&N filter over it. Simply slides right over. Make sure that you put the hose clamp around it, and then it'll just use a Phillips head screwdriver to get it tightened up. Once that's nice and tight, you're ready to put the top of the heat shield on. To make sure this is nice and tight, go ahead and grab the L bracket with the rubber bushing in the stud. Orient it in such a manner that the bushing is facing towards the back of the Jeep, and then you can go ahead and grab your bolt with the lock washer and regular washer on there and get it started. And then we'll tighten it up after we figure out where it needs to be mounted. This is all 10mm too, so we'll get it snugged up. This part is a bit hard to see on camera, but this is going to utilize your factory radiator shroud bolt here that we took off, and then go onto the outer part of this heat shield. You slide it back into there, and then this stud will go through this heat shield here. We'll put a washer and a provided lock nut onto there. And we're not even going to tighten this down yet until we figure out where everything else goes. Go ahead and grab your factory hardware. This is the one with a large washer that's pressed in. And we will put that back into where it was. I'm going to get this factory bolt tightened up and then go ahead and tighten down the stud. To make sure that the heat shield has enough holes for it to bolt down to, there's one other bracket that needs to be put in place. First, you got to grab this rubber stud here and place it where the factory bolt went in there. Make sure it's snugged up. Go ahead and grab the Z bracket here. Use the shorter end with the oblong tool and place it at the bottom. Go ahead and grab a bolt, lock washer, and regular washer and get that tightened up. Once you get it tightened up, it'll still be on that rubber piece. That way it has a little bit of give left and right, and that'll allow us to mount the heat shield here without having to go back and loosen that up. So let's get that mounted now. Grab the lid to your heat shield here with the 3 bolt holes facing towards the driver's side and roughly set it into place. Go ahead and grab your Allen key hardware. I'm going to start in the middle here. That way I don't have to hold it in place the entire time. Go ahead and grab your connecting hose and we're going to put it onto this shroud here. Now there are 2 different types of hose clamps. There's one with a gold zinc end on it. Use the one that's the silver that matches the hose clamp, as it's a little bit bigger and helps you for this install. Make sure that that's on all the way and then go ahead and tighten down the hose clamp. Put this piece of hose right under the throttle body here and then use the hose clamp with the gold zinc end on it. That's a little bit smaller, it's going to make it a lot easier for you. Get that on firmly and then tighten down this inner clamp. Grab your factory intake tube. We're going to remove the temperature sensor. We sprayed a little bit WD and we're just going to turn it counterclockwise. And pull it out towards you. Now be careful with this as it is pretty fragile. We're going to put that into our new K&N tube. Grab your K&N intake tube and put on the factory sensor into this K&N tube. Once it's fully seated in there, twist it clockwise to tighten it up. Just give it a little bit and it should be tight and ready to go. You want this 90-degree elbow to be facing the same way as this pipe here. That way when you plug in the new hose, it's the right direction and you want to twist it around. The next step is to put the zip ties into these provided brackets. That way you keep your radiator overflows hose up and out of the way of the intake tube. Orient it in this manner and then put this push pin zip tie in through this round hole. Just like that. Make sure that the oblong hole is at the bottom. You can spin this however way it works once we put it on there. We're going to put it into these factory holes here for the factory retainers. That way it zip ties it up and out of the way and doesn't cause any issues. Make sure that these are facing down when you put them on and use the factory hardware to thread them on. Go ahead and place the other one on in the same orientation. Now that they're all the way down, we're going to pull this overflow hose up over the zip ties, get some of the slack out of it here, and then just wrap the zip ties around and go through the other end. And tighten down the hose, and we'll clip off the excess on the bottom of the zip ties. Before we put the intake tube on, we're going to put the new included crankcase ventilation tube back onto the factory location. Install the crankcase hose onto the 90-degree elbow and then reconnect the electrical connection for your temperature sensor and you're ready to put the intake tube in. Slip the zinc clamp onto the front here. With the intake tube on, we can now tighten down our hose clamps. We're going to start at the front here. Then we're going to move on to this back clamp. And your installation is finished. So we just finished up the install of the K&N Series 77 air intake and it looks really great. Plus it's going to give us a ton of more performance. It's going to add about 10 horsepower with about 9 foot-pounds of torque based on K&N's rating. It was a pretty simple installation. It only took about 2 hours, and you can use some basic hand tools. Now you can find this K&N air intake as well as many other great parts for your JK right here at cjponyparts.com.